It was an ordinary morning for Emily. The soft hum of birds chirping filled the air as she sat on her porch with a steaming cup of tea in hand. She loved the quiet of the countryside. It was the perfect escape from her busy work life. She watched as the sun slowly rose, casting a warm glow over the garden she carefully nurtured over the years. The soft breeze carried the scent of flowers and fresh earth, a reminder of how peaceful life could be in the small town she called home. But on that particular morning, something unusual caught her attention. At the edge of her yard, near the line of trees that marked the beginning of the woods, she noticed movement. At first, she thought it was a deer or perhaps a fox, creatures she'd often spotted in the area. But as her eyes focused, she realized it wasn't any wild animal. It was a dog. The animal was thin, its coat matted and dirty, as though it had been wandering for days or perhaps weeks. Its fur, once a beautiful mix of tan and black, now looked dull and tangled, and the dog's ribs were visibly showing, the result of days without proper food. Emily's heart tightened at the sight. The dog was standing still, just a few feet away from her fence, staring out at the open field beyond, as though it didn't know where to go next. Its eyes, however, weren't wild. They were tired, but they held a quiet plea, as if asking for help. She put down her tea, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. She wasn't one to turn a blind eye when it came to animals in need. Without a second thought, she stood up, her sandals making soft taps on the wooden porch as she made her way toward the dog. At first, the dog didn't move, but as Emily approached, it turned its head, watching her cautiously. The air between them was filled with an almost palpable tension, a quiet standoff, as though both were sizing each other up. Emily kneeled down slowly, extending her hand in a gesture of peace. "Hey there, boy," she said softly, her voice gentle. The dog's eyes flicked toward her hand, then back to her face, as if trying to decide if she was friend or foe. Then, in a movement almost too fast for her to react, the dog padded forward. Emily's heart leaped, and she instinctively took a step back. But the dog wasn't threatening her. He was hungry. He sniffed the air, then dropped his head toward the ground, looking at the small bowl of food she had placed on the grass. His tail wagged, albeit weakly, as he cautiously approached the bowl. Emily took another step back, watching quietly as the dog eagerly lapped up the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. As he finished, he looked up at her once more, their eyes meeting for a brief, unspoken exchange. Then, without another sound, the dog turned and trotted away into the trees, disappearing into the quiet morning mist. Emily stood there for a moment, still processing what had just happened. She had fed a stray dog, a dog that had come to her door seeking help. There was something about that brief encounter that left her heart aching, a sense that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Little did she know the German Shepherd would be back the very next day, bringing with him an unexpected surprise. The next morning, Emily awoke to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through her curtains, casting long shadows across her room. The peaceful quiet of the countryside was always a comfort, but today there was a sense of anticipation in the air. She went about her morning routine, watering her plants, sweeping the porch, and brewing another cup of tea, when she suddenly froze. Something felt different. There, standing at the edge of her yard once again, was the German Shepherd. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emily blinked, squinting to make sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. The shepherd, still thin and weathered, stood by the edge of the trees, but right behind him, a small, trembling puppy huddled close. The pup looked barely old enough to be away from its mother, its fur matted and dirt-covered, its body fragile and unsure. Emily's heart immediately skipped a beat. Max, as she had begun calling the shepherd in her mind, stood tall and steady, as if guarding the smaller dog. He gave Emily a quick glance, but then turned his attention back to the pup, as if making sure the little one was safe before anything else. The puppy, on the other hand, looked lost and afraid, its eyes wide and fearful as it shifted its weight from one paw to another. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just a visit for food anymore. The shepherd had brought the puppy to her for a reason. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she took a tentative step toward them. She was filled with questions. Where had this puppy come from? What had happened to them both? Why had Max returned, bringing the little one along? She crouched down slowly, trying not to startle them. The shepherd's posture remained calm, but he stood between her and the pup, his body stiff but not aggressive. Emily knew that, despite the gentleness in his eyes, Max was still wary, still unsure whether he could trust her fully. "Hey there," Emily whispered, her voice soft but clear. "You're back, and you brought someone with you." Max didn't move, but he watched her intently, his eyes studying every move she made. The puppy, still unsure, took a few hesitant steps forward, its tiny legs wobbling. Emily reached out a hand slowly, speaking in a calm, soothing tone. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Then, to Emily's surprise, the puppy edged closer, as if drawn to her presence. With Max still standing guard nearby, the little dog took a few more steps forward, its eyes never leaving Emily's face. She could see the hesitation in its movements, but there was also something else, something softer. The puppy was hungry. It was scared, yes, but it was also trusting, reaching out for the food Emily had placed on the ground just the day before. Max, ever the protector, let out a low growl, not at Emily, but as a warning to any potential threat in the area. His eyes stayed fixed on her as the puppy bent down, slowly and cautiously, to start eating. Emily held her breath for a moment, watching them both. She knew she couldn't force anything. She had to wait for them to trust her, just as she had done the day before with Max. She didn't move an inch, letting the moment unfold on its own. She wanted to show them both that they were safe here, that she was someone they could rely on. Finally, after the puppy had taken a few bites, Emily reached into her pocket for a small treat. She placed it gently on the ground near the puppy. This time, the puppy looked up at her, and for the first time, Emily saw something else in its eyes. Hope. The trust had started to form, and it felt like the beginning of something important. Max gave a quiet huff, turning his head as if satisfied with the progress. The shepherd slowly backed away, but never took his eyes off her. Emily smiled softly to herself, realizing that this was more than just feeding a stray dog. This was the beginning of a connection, a bond that would only grow stronger with time. The following days felt surreal for Emily. What began as a simple act of kindness, feeding a stray dog, had evolved into something far more meaningful. Each morning, she woke to find Max and the puppy waiting at the edge of her yard. Max, always the first to appear, stood stoically, while the puppy, Luna, hid behind him, her large, brown eyes peeking out nervously. Emily couldn't help but smile at the sight, though her heart ached for the small dog, who still seemed unsure of everything around her. Emily continued to offer food and water, always leaving a little extra for Luna, who had started to come closer each day, albeit cautiously. Max, though still protective, had softened around Emily. He no longer growled or watched her with suspicion, and his tail would wag ever so slightly when she came near. The bond between them was becoming clearer, stronger. But despite the daily rituals, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this story, something she wasn't yet seeing. She couldn't ignore the silent way Max would watch over Luna, the almost unspoken way he communicated his protectiveness. It was as if he was trying to tell her something, trying to make her understand that Luna needed help, that there was something about the puppy's situation that required immediate attention. One morning, after Emily placed the food on the ground, Max did something unexpected. He walked toward the woods and paused, glancing over his shoulder at her. His eyes, though gentle, were filled with urgency. Emily stood still, confused at first, but then she understood he was waiting for her. He wanted her to follow. She hesitated for only a moment before grabbing her jacket and walking toward him, her feet crunching softly on the gravel path. Max remained several steps ahead, as if guiding her, but he never left Luna's side. Emily followed him toward the woods, the trees growing thicker around them as they ventured deeper. The air smelled fresh, earthy, and damp, and Emily could hear the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind moved through the branches. Max led her to a small clearing where the underbrush was dense and the ground uneven. It was quiet here, too quiet, and Emily's senses began to heighten, as if something in her gut was telling her this was important. Max paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back at Emily again, this time with a soft whine. He turned toward a pile of brush nearby, sniffing the ground, then gently pawing at the dirt. Emily stepped closer, her heart racing with anticipation. Was there something hidden under the brush? She crouched down, carefully moving the twigs and leaves aside. Beneath the pile, she discovered what appeared to be a small, torn blanket. As she lifted it, she found a bundle. Another puppy, small and cold, its tiny body trembling. Emily gasped, her heart sinking as she realized the truth. Max hadn't just brought her Luna for food or care. He had brought her to find another life that needed saving. This wasn't just a stray dog situation. This was a desperate plea for help. She gently picked up the small puppy, feeling its fragile little body in her hands. Its eyes were closed, but its breathing was shallow. There was no doubt in her mind now. Max had led her here to save this helpless creature, the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed. Turning to Max, who stood patiently by her side, Emily whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." It was clear now that Max wasn't just a stray dog seeking food. He was a protector, a guardian who had come to her not only for help, but to show her the depth of his loyalty and love for Luna and this new tiny life. Emily had never been more certain that she couldn't turn away. These animals needed her, and she was ready to do whatever it took. With the tiny puppy in her arms, Emily carefully retraced her steps back through the woods, Max and Luna trailing closely behind. The weight of the situation settled heavily in her chest. This was no longer just about feeding stray animals. It had become something more profound. Max had brought her to this moment, guiding her through the woods to find the abandoned puppy. She had no doubt that if she hadn't followed him, the little one might not have survived much longer. The thought made her stomach tighten. As she walked, Emily's mind raced. What had happened to these dogs? Where had they come from? And how had they survived in the wild for so long? The sense of urgency grew stronger with every step, knowing that the puppy was in critical condition. She needed to get them all the help they deserved, and fast. Max, always the protector, stayed close by her side, glancing up at her every now and then. His presence was comforting, a quiet reassurance that she was doing the right thing. Luna, who had grown more comfortable around Emily, walked just behind them, her ears perked and eyes watchful, though she remained close to Max. The three of them, with the new addition in Emily's arms, made their way back to the house, and Emily hurried inside to gather her things. Without wasting a moment, she called the local vet clinic. Thankfully, they could fit them in right away. Emily's hands shook slightly as she set the tiny puppy down on a soft towel in her kitchen, her heart in her throat. Max and Luna stood nearby, watching her with expectant eyes. She quickly packed them into her car, ensuring the injured puppy was as comfortable as possible, and drove the short distance to the clinic. As they arrived, the vet, Dr. Ellis, a kind woman with a calm demeanor, greeted them warmly. She immediately began examining the puppy. Emily watched anxiously as Dr. Ellis gently checked the little one's body, her brow furrowed in concern. "She's cold and underweight," Dr. Ellis said softly, her fingers moving delicately over the pup's fragile body. "It's a good thing you brought her in when you did. She's dehydrated and her paw is hurt. We'll need to run some tests, but she'll be okay with proper care." Emily let out a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding, her relief palpable. The puppy had made it through the worst, but there was still much to do. Dr. Ellis then turned her attention to Max and Luna, giving each of them a quick but thorough examination. Max, although still a little wary of the new environment, seemed to understand they were there for help. His eyes softened as the vet gently checked his legs and sides, confirming that while he had a few scars and scratches, nothing appeared to be life-threatening. Luna, still shy but growing more accustomed to human contact, received a clean bill of health, though she was also a little underweight. "We'll give them both a good meal and fluids," Dr. Ellis said, "and I'll bandage the puppy's paw. I recommend keeping them both on a proper diet for a few weeks and making sure they get plenty of rest." Emily nodded, grateful for the vet's expertise. She couldn't imagine how difficult the past few weeks must have been for them, but now they were in good hands. She made sure to ask for the necessary instructions on how to care for the puppy's paw and what kind of food would help them recover. As the vet wrapped up her examination, she looked up at Emily with a thoughtful expression. "You did a good thing bringing them in. They're lucky to have found you." Max's soft gaze met Emily's as if he understood the words. It wasn't just luck that had brought them together. It was something deeper, something that tied them all in ways Emily hadn't fully grasped until that moment. She smiled, feeling a deep connection to these animals, these beings who had come into her life unexpectedly, but had already changed it in ways she couldn't explain. As the vet finished their care and sent them on their way, Emily felt a sense of purpose settle in her chest. This wasn't just a stray dog situation anymore. This was her family now, and she would do whatever it took to ensure they were safe and loved. Over the following weeks, Emily's home became a haven for Max, Luna, and the little puppy, now affectionately named Bear. Max had shown a level of protectiveness that deeply touched Emily. He had not only led her to Bear, but had also made sure that Luna and the new puppy were always safe, always near. His instincts were fierce, and it was clear that his primary concern was the well-being of the smaller dogs. Emily had taken the time to create a cozy, comfortable space for the trio in her home. Max had a bed in the living room. Luna had a small blanket by the fireplace, and Bear, still fragile but growing stronger every day, slept in a soft crate Emily had set up for her. They all ate together, Max always ensuring that Luna and Bear ate before he did, as though guiding them in the simple rituals of trust and survival. But it was when Emily noticed Max's behavior in the mornings that her heart truly swelled with admiration for him. He would gently nudge Luna awake, his big brown eyes soft and patient as he waited for her to stir. Then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible bark, he would signal for the day to begin. Luna would slowly rise, stretching her small legs, and Bear would follow suit, though she still relied on Max for reassurance. Max's attention to Luna and Bear was constant, but his protectiveness had taken a subtle form. Whenever someone approached the house or came too close to the yard, Max would immediately stand between the stranger and the others. His body would go rigid, his eyes sharp, and though he never acted aggressively, there was no doubt he was on high alert. Emily had never seen such a powerful, silent devotion before. It was as if he had taken it upon himself to make sure they were safe at all costs. One evening, a neighbor came by to drop off some extra dog food they had. Emily had known them for years, but the moment they stepped too close to the yard, Max was there, his posture commanding and unyielding. The neighbor paused, clearly surprised by the change in Max's demeanor, but they didn't seem frightened. Emily quickly stepped out to greet them and reassured Max with a soft, calming voice. "Don't worry, Max," she said, her voice warm and soothing. "They're just bringing us some food." At her words, Max relaxed just a little, but he remained standing between Emily and the neighbor. The neighbor smiled knowingly, offering a polite wave and walking back to their car. Emily glanced down at Max, who now looked at her, his eyes full of silent question. It was as if he was asking her, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Emily whispered, giving him a gentle pat on the head. "You can trust them." Max's tail wagged once, slow but content, and he seemed to relax into the moment. But even then, he never fully let his guard down. He had come to trust Emily, yes, but his loyalty and protectiveness over Luna and Bear would never falter. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of love, of responsibility. As the days went on, Emily found herself in awe of how much Max had given to Luna and Bear. He had shown them what it meant to survive, yes, but he had also shown them what it meant to care for one another, to protect one another. Max wasn't just a stray dog looking for food. He was a guardian, a father figure, a protector of everything he held dear. And Emily realized, with a quiet warmth in her heart, that she too had become part of that circle of protection, that unspoken bond that held them all together. As the weeks passed, Emily watched the transformation in Max, Luna, and Bear. The healing was not just physical, it was emotional too. The bond between them all grew stronger each day, and with each passing moment, Emily found herself more deeply attached to these three incredible animals who had unexpectedly entered her life. Luna, once skittish and withdrawn, had become more playful. She chased after sticks in the yard, wagging her tail so hard that her entire body would wiggle with excitement. She had found joy in the small, simple things, and it made Emily's heart swell to see her so free. Bear, though still small and fragile, had started to grow stronger, her tiny paws no longer trembling as they had when Emily first found her. She learned to trust, slowly but surely, and when Emily sat down to read on the porch, Bear would often curl up at her feet, her eyes heavy with contentment. Max remained the steady presence in their lives, always vigilant and protective. But even Max, the stoic, quiet guardian, seemed to soften in Emily's presence. He would nuzzle against her leg in the evenings, seeking affection, his warm eyes full of gratitude. Every time Emily sat down, he would come to her, his body leaning against hers, and for a moment the world would feel still, as if there was nothing more important than the connection they shared. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the garden, surrounded by the sweet scent of blooming flowers, Bear ventured over to the corner of the yard, a place she had been avoiding for days. It was a small, fenced-off area where Emily kept her tools and where the old oak tree provided a bit of shade. Bear, ever the curious one, trotted over to it, her small nose twitching with interest. Emily watched, intrigued. She had been careful not to push Bear into anything she wasn't ready for, but today the little dog seemed braver. Bear nosed at the gate, trying to squeeze through the bars, and Emily could see her trying to overcome her fear. Slowly, Emily got up, walking toward her. "Bear," Emily called softly, "what are you up to, little one?" Bear paused for a moment, then looked back at Emily with a tiny whimper. She wagged her tail nervously, as though asking for permission. Emily smiled gently, crouching down to Bear's level. "It's okay," she said. "You can explore." With that encouragement, Bear wiggled her way through the gate, a slight hesitation in her movements. But then, to Emily's surprise, she ran straight toward the tree, her tail wagging, as though she had discovered a whole new world. It was a moment of liberation, a sign that Bear was no longer the fragile, fearful pup she had once been. She had grown strong enough to face the world. Max, who had been watching from the porch, stood up and walked over to Emily, his posture still protective, but his gaze soft and approving. He stood beside her as they both watched Bear, and Emily felt the weight of the moment settle in. The puppy was no longer the same trembling little creature she had found in the woods. She was blossoming into a brave and curious dog, just like Luna had. The trio had come so far in such a short time, and Emily knew there was still so much ahead. But in that moment, she understood that their journey was more than just about survival. It was about healing, growth, and love. Love that had been built slowly, over time, brick by brick, and now stood firm like the oak tree in the yard. Max had brought them all together, and Emily had given them a home. But in return, these animals had given her something more than she could have ever imagined. A family, a sense of belonging, and the understanding that sometimes love doesn't need words to be understood. It was a cool evening when Emily first noticed something unusual. Max had been on high alert for the past few hours, his ears perked and his eyes scanning the surroundings. Normally, he was calm in the evenings, content to rest near Emily after a long day of watching over Luna and Bear. But tonight, there was something different. Emily was sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet of the evening and the sounds of the crickets. She had just finished dinner and was sipping a cup of tea when Max suddenly stood, his head tilted toward the far end of the yard. His body was tense, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. He let out a low growl, deep and steady, a warning that Emily had never heard before. "Max," she called softly, her voice full of concern. Max didn't respond, instead stepping forward, moving toward the trees with deliberate slowness. Luna, who had been playfully chasing a ball, stopped in her tracks and looked at him, her head cocked in confusion. Bear, too, sensed the change in the air. She scurried over to Emily's feet and looked up, her small eyes wide. Emily stood and followed Max's gaze, but she couldn't see anything unusual. The moonlight cast long shadows across the yard, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. There was no sign of anyone, or anything, approaching. Suddenly, from the corner of the yard, a shadow moved. It was a figure, a silhouette against the dark backdrop of the trees. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She instinctively reached down to calm Bear, whose little body was trembling. Max, however, wasn't afraid. He stood tall, his posture firm and resolute. The figure moved closer, and Emily could make out a person, someone familiar. It was Jack, the man who lived a few miles down the road. He was a local farmer whom Emily had met a few times, but she hadn't seen him in over a month. Jack was carrying a bundle of something in his arms, and it wasn't until he came closer that Emily saw what it was. A small, bedraggled puppy, no older than Bear when Emily had first found her, was nestled in his arms. The little dog's eyes were wide, and its fur looked matted and dirty. It was clear that the puppy had been through a lot. Emily's heart sank at the sight. "Jack," she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "What's going on?" Jack paused a few feet away, his eyes soft with concern. "I found her near my barn," he explained, his voice low and hesitant. "She's alone, Emily. She was just sitting there, shivering, looking like she didn't have anyone." Emily's heart ached as she reached out, her hands trembling. The puppy in Jack's arms was so small, so fragile. Emily immediately stepped forward, and Max, ever the protector, moved to her side, giving a low, almost inaudible growl in Jack's direction. It wasn't an aggressive growl, it was a warning, a reminder that Max didn't take kindly to strangers coming near his family. "It's okay, Max," Emily murmured, reaching out to pet him. "He's not a threat." Jack, who had been watching Max warily, seemed to understand. He carefully placed the tiny puppy in Emily's arms, his eyes sad. "I thought you'd want to help her," he said. "She's got no one, and I didn't know what to do." As Emily cradled the new puppy, she felt a swell of emotion in her chest. She had never expected this. Another life, another soul in need of care. And yet, here it was, staring at her with those wide, trusting eyes. She looked up at Jack, her expression soft but determined. "Thank you, Jack. I'll take care of her," she said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming feeling of responsibility. She turned her gaze to Max, who had softened a little, his tail giving a slow wag as he watched the new puppy. Max had brought her Luna. He had brought her Bear. And now he had silently led her to this moment. Emily didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. No matter how many lives came into her care, she would never turn her back. She would love them all. With a final glance at Jack, she turned and began walking back to the house, the new puppy nestled securely in her arms. Max, Luna, and Bear followed closely behind, their tails wagging in unison. The family had grown, and though the path ahead might be uncertain, Emily knew that she wasn't alone anymore. The days after Jack's visit were filled with an overwhelming sense of purpose and love. The tiny puppy, now named Daisy, quickly settled into her new home. Like Bear before her, she was small and fragile, but her eyes sparkled with the same curiosity and innocence that had drawn Emily to the others. It wasn't long before Daisy began to bond with the rest of the family. Max, ever the protector, had taken it upon himself to show Daisy the ropes. He was patient with her, never too harsh, always guiding her with gentle nudges and soft growls when she ventured too far into the yard. Luna, though still a bit more reserved, had warmed to Daisy, and the two would often play together in the yard, running in circles and tumbling over each other. The bond between them all was undeniable. Each dog, with their own unique story and past, had found a home in Emily's heart. As the weeks went by, Emily found herself thinking back to the day she had first met Max, the scruffy German shepherd who had come into her life in search of food. At the time, she hadn't known what to expect, and now, with 4 dogs under her care, she realized just how much he had changed her life. He wasn't just a stray, he had been a guide, a guardian, leading her not only to Luna and Bear, but now to Daisy as well. Max had brought her more than just animals. He had brought her a family that was bound not by blood, but by love and loyalty. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch watching the dogs play in the yard, a peaceful calm settled over her. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. The dogs were content, and so was she. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, while Luna and Bear ran in playful circles, their laughter-like barks filling the air. Daisy, still small and a little awkward in her movements, was trying to catch up with them, her ears flopping with each jump. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to savor the silence, the feeling of belonging, of being at peace with the world around her. It had taken a long time for her to realize that the family she had always dreamed of didn't have to look the way she had imagined. She had thought that family meant a house full of people, but in reality, it was a house full of love. Love that came in the form of wagging tails, warm fur, and the constant companionship of her four-legged friends. She reached down and scratched Max behind the ears, his eyes closing in contentment. He had been through so much in his life, and now he had found a home, a family. Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward him. Without him, she wouldn't have known the depth of the bond she could share with an animal, let alone four. She had learned more from Max and the others than she could have ever imagined. As the sun set and the sky darkened, Emily rose from her chair and opened the door to the house. The dogs followed her inside, eager to settle in for the night. Max walked first, followed by Luna, Bear, and Daisy, each one finding their spot in the living room. Emily stood in the doorway for a moment, watching as they all settled down together, their bodies curled up in a peaceful content heap. "Good night, my loves," she whispered softly, her voice filled with affection. And as she turned off the lights and crawled into bed, she knew without a doubt that this was her family now. A family she had never expected, but one she was forever grateful for. The stray German shepherd had changed her life in more ways than she could have ever imagined, and together they were more than just survivors. They were a testament to the power of love, trust, and second chances. Emily drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, united as a family.